let's take a look at the lamps are going out. World War I. This is strategic coverage of the war. I think a little heavier than SPI's World War I, but a little lighter than just about anything else. Maybe on about the same level as Paths of Glory in terms of how it works. That's speaking from my opinion right now. My history with this is really only that I got to play a playtest version of it at the Expo quite a few years back, and it showed some promise. It was still in a development stage, and the playtesters didn't have a full grasp of the rules as they were currently in position. And I kind of walked away with mixed feelings of it, like, gosh, I'm not sure. And since then, it's been on my, I kind of want to get this, but there are so many games available, and I buy more than I can play, and get more than I can play. And Compass, bless their hearts, have been putting out so many World War I games that this one just didn't end up. I wasn't willing to pay the higher price that Compass games go for in comparison to, say, GMT. They're in line with most of the hobby, but GMT, with their larger print runs, Chinese production, etc., is able to put things together at a cheaper price, and that matters to me. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it shouldn't. Maybe I should be supporting the smaller companies more. Not that Compass is terribly small. They've put out a lot of games that are interesting in one way or another to me. Very interesting subject matter, sometimes interesting treatments of the game. However, they tend to be a little less polished, and this is no exception to that. And they also often make some graphical design choices that I'm not terribly thrilled with. This may end up being that. I see some iffy points about the graphical design in this, but well, let's take a look. First thing is the rule book is one of those where, you know, it's not, so far it doesn't seem like it's terrible, but some of the wording choices, etc., leave some ambiguities that will leave me trying to puzzle things out a little bit more than perhaps I should. Now, I'm not the swiftest in terms of dealing with new rules, but I can also tell when something's a little shakier than maybe the usual. It is a fairly simple game, though, so I hope to be able to handle this without too much difficulty. The driving force in the game to make it a little bit more flavored. So the old SPI, you know, World War I, and the Rand Great War game, and maybe a number of others. Haven't gotten around to Guns of August yet, even, nor its redesign. Although my eye is on that, of course. That's another Compass design. These games all kind of have a, hey, you know, we've got a fairly simple system, and it doesn't really cover a lot of detail. For this, the conceit, in order to try to get the detail, is a series of technology cards and event cards. And it doesn't look like there are a lot of event cards. These are the ones that apply to 1914 only. I've got, you shuffle in more events each year. And some of the events only apply to a particular year or to a span of years, in which case, if you draw that event, it's a no effect. Which means that since I think all of the events are kind of drawn from history, some of them are not going to have much. So you're never going to get the full historical list of events happening, I think. But the idea might be that some of these didn't have that much effect in reality, and the card may enhance that effect. Okay. Let's take a look at the map. Mountains. It's an area-based game. You got your little ports. You got mountain ranges, which indicate mountainous terrain. Likewise, Pripyat marshes is the marsh terrain. It's not a border between regions. It's just the whole terrain of the region. What else do we have here of interest? You got production centers here, which you add up, and that'll be how much stuff you can build. You have some boxes that represent some of the play in the game. So, for example, the blockade is represented here. The Germans can sally out or sortie out and fight, perhaps. You got a couple of different choices for submarine warfare. At the beginning of the game, Germans could start with unrestrained submarine warfare. This is not how I remember the game being played in the version I saw, so I remember the subs kind of sailing around and doing stuff rather than being in a box. So this is probably a better solution. You have some off-map boxes. The East Africa situation isn't going to have a lot of effect on the war as a whole, but perhaps it has some effect on, well, there is a production point, and it can have some effect on what the English, maybe there's events that call them into there or whatever. You also have a couple of these boxes. The boxes are kind of representing areas without doing so in quite the same fashion. However, they're also limited to only one piece in them at a time, which makes things kind of different. Pieces are armies for the most part. Trenches are going to be handled a little strange. They have their own counters here, which isn't too shocking, but actually it is kind of shocking. I don't think I know another strategic game that actually has for World War I that actually has entrenchment markers like this. The trenches are handled kind of like actual additional armies you have to defeat. You'll see how that works when we take a look at the military system. Little flags indicate the capitals, which are goals to defeating those countries. In the case of Russia, there are 2 capitals, not Austria, however, interestingly enough. You got a lot of pieces beyond the armies, beyond what I've noted, which are event card markers and technology markers, which will be described in the cards. A good way to get the rules out of the rule book so you don't have to learn it and onto the cards. However, we'll see how well they do, because sometimes the limited text availability that you can put on a card ends up in a cost for clarity. You have a bunch of these. These allow you to transfer income or production points from one country to another. Some control markers. They're double-sided to indicate who owns what. That's about it. A bunch of different colored dice. I'm not quite sure why. You do roll-offs in this game, so there's that. Okay. And we actually had a description of all the pieces in the rule book, which I didn't go for. The setup is fixed. It's only going to start at the beginning of 1914. There's one game here. There are not scenarios. It runs the whole war. Again, puts it more in that SPI World War I context. Although I think this will be a little longer. Not a huge game, but... and how to set up the decks. Okay. The base sequence of play works as follows. Each player gets a player turn in order. Now, there are 4 player factions in the game. There's the Germans, who get to operate on their own, followed by the Western Allies, as part of the Triple Entente, then followed by the Eastern Allies, which is basically Russia, Romania, etc., and the United States. I don't know how much confusion that's going to cause when the U.S. pieces aren't able to actually cooperate with the French and British. although there's an argument for why you would want that lack of cooperation, certainly because Pershing insisted on not being put under other commands. And then finally, the fourth player, or the fourth power in the game, is the Central Powers allies, which focus primarily on Austria-Hungary. One thing with this game, and Turkey, of course, one thing with this game is its design intention is not to provide you with any kind of sandbox. You're not going to be looking at something where, you're making big political decisions in the game. You're not going to be trying to sway Italy, for example, from one side to the other. Even Great War at least allows for that, even if the players don't have any control over it, which may be particularly unpleasant to some people. But in this particular game, you're going to be facing largely the historical World War I. You're not going to see any great shifts here. And that can be for good or bad. It means the game's going to follow a fair pattern. It's not going to go way off the rails. You can have certain expectations that the history is going to be close to something believable. On the other hand, you don't have the opportunity to explore the big what-ifs. And the game really, because of the cards, etc., it's not all baked into a system that you can kind of say, well, what if Italy was on the Allied? You just can't make those decisions. They're baked into the cards, or what if Italy stayed with the old Triple Alliance with Austria and Germany, or stayed out of the war? What would those things mean? Well, you don't have that option in this. And Balance of Power, another recent one that I looked, that gives you a lot more what-if capability, without a ridiculously high cost in terms of the amount of playtime. It's still a big game, but it's not up there with La Grande Guerre, which of course, is my particular favorite for this. And Fatal Alliance is probably close to La Grande Guerre in terms of how big a game it's going to be. Okay, so anyway, each of the players gets their full player turn. Now, in the first game turn, Germany has certain restrictions on them to make sure that they follow the Schlieffen Plan. Interestingly, in that attempt to make sure that you get World War I here and you don't get something else, the Schlieffen Plan is mathematically impossible to achieve here. It's likely you will get, it's reasonably likely that you will get the historical success. I can see an argument one way or the other for that. Obviously, it would be really, really strange to play the game and it's over in the first 2 turns, And you're like, well, that was interesting. The playtest version I had, I believe it was still possible, but they decided to withdraw it for that very reason. Who wants to set up the game and then, play it? The other argument in favor of it is that as the Schlieffen Plan started to have some problems, the Germans kind of withdrew from it. Not entirely, but got themselves into a position where they weren't playing for the Schlieffen Plan as extremely as the plan actually required. They were instead setting up for, what happens if this doesn't work? And that's important because if your play is based on, hey, I got maybe a 50-50 chance of getting the Schlieffen Plan off, you might try to push it every time at a potential cost to the game being representing a very different historical reality. I would favor that. I like being able to explore different situations better. But again, the game's not set up. If France falls, the game is over. It's a Central Powers victory. It would not result in a reasonable situation within the confines of this game. So I understand why they made the decision. And, it's probably not the game that I would be designing or searching for myself, but that doesn't mean that we can't have some fun looking at history through a more constricted lens than maybe we'd prefer. Okay. And anyway, there are some rules that make sure that you do things according to the Schlieffen Plan. You don't go for a Russia first movement, for example. To get additional production for taking Belgium if you get it early. For the Western Allies, you also have a restriction giving you the Plan 17, which is you must attack from Verdun into the Rhine, and you get a -1 DRM. Now here's where the game gets kind of funky. So there's a note here, and I mean, I wouldn't know about this if it weren't for the note, but the Western Allies is unfortunate, if they're unfortunate enough to have also drawn the Pantaloons Rouge event card on the first turn. They must make 2 of those attacks at a -1 DRM each. Now, here's the problem. Those pants were a fact of life, you know, at least as much as Plan 17, and they sure the hell wouldn't have put them into play if, you know, I don't know. I don't know what the argument is for why that might happen later or why it might not happen. It seems almost baked in, but okay, whatever. All right, so the base set of phases that you do during one turn is first, if it's the spring turn, you shuffle in new event cards. Then you draw an event card and read it, and it takes effect or it does not. Then you're allowed to do movement. Now this is more of a strategic movement type thing. It's not, you know, some kind of tactical movement within. It's placing your armies into positions where they can attack, and you'll be attacking from one area into another, which is a little different than the Great War handles, for example, which understands that, hey, you know, this is a big area. There's room for both sides to be in there. The front might switch within there. Nah, it's done more of a risk type fashion, which I don't know about. You're able to shift your U-boats and fleets. Okay. Then you resolve any combats you wish out of that, of various types. And then finally you go into a production phase where you basically count up your forces, your production capability, and you buy stuff. However, there are some, the U-boat is resolved during this phase, and you also get your technological cards at this point. And then finally, you do a little bit of bookkeeping where you're allowed to play around with air superiority once that's in place, and any heavy artillery that's fired gets flipped back over into the unfired state, which is kind of weird because I thought you had to pay. When I first read the rules, before I got to that section, I thought you had to pay the same kind of cost that you have to pay to recover units in order to recover your ammunition for the heavy artillery, which was interesting to me. The heavy artillery doesn't seem potent enough to justify that, however, so we'll see. Maybe it would have been, but okay. Most of the event cards, once you play them, are out of the game from then on, but some of them have a persistent effect, or some of them also get reshuffled back into the decks. Cards have an eligibility as to what years they can be played in. If you draw an event that's outside your range, it'll be an earlier event. It's discarded with no effect. Okay. Areas. Okay, so at the beginning, here's where there's actually a wording here that is obviously wrong. You know, any gamer, any war gamer is going to recognize that this doesn't work as worded. So it's not like it has a material effect on how you're gonna, understand the rules, but it shows some of the sloppiness. Let me see if I can find it. Friendly controlled areas are areas that were originally controlled by the Alliance at the start of the game or upon entry into the war, are currently occupied by friendly armies from the same alliance, or areas which the Alliance's armies were the last to occupy. So this does not fully express how things move. And I don't think anything within here actually fully expresses what they're trying to say, which is really quite simple. You start out with certain areas under your control, and as the enemy moves into or through them, they can take them from you, and then they're no longer yours unless you take them back. I don't know. Okay. If an area is empty, it's considered to be garrisoned. Now, an area that's empty in enemy territory is very easy to take back. An area that's empty in your own original territory, that garrison has a potential effect in terms of it can win a combat. In both cases, there's some cost to attacking, however, to take it. Okay. For the most part, areas can hold as many pieces as you can get to them. The exceptions are these squares and the circles over in East Africa. They can only hold one piece each. Supply is, okay, land supply is basically tracing a path from your own areas to a home area of the power that is trying to trace supply, or in some cases to the home area production spaces, which is, I believe, when you're trying to refit units. You can sometimes see supply. Sea supply is traced through the Black Sea only if Gallipoli and Anatolia are friendly controlled. So basically, sea supply is something only the Allies use, and if they can take Turkey, essentially they then get access to the Black Sea and can operate over there. Okay, so movement. Movement allows you to move up to 2 army units only. These can be, you pick them up and you trace them from land area to land area until you get to where you want to go. And that's about it. Only through friendly controlled areas. If the U.S. has entered the game, the U.S. units are allowed to independently move. I guess this means an additional, I'm not sure, using either a land or a sea move. And the other Eastern Allies and United States faction units will cost against your normal 2 army limit. But the U.S., once they enter, give you an extra piece you can move. During the Eastern Ally Triple Entente player turn. Now, when I say player, I'm kind of saying things falsely. Basically, there's a construction and an ordering to the turn. This is essentially a 2-player game, but there's an ordering to the turns that breaks the movement of pieces into basically 4 different segments. Those 4 segments allow you to play the game in 3 or 4 players much more easily than just saying, yeah, you can have Russia and this. You have Russia and the United States because they move and operate together for whatever the value that is. Turkey, Central Allies move 2 armies in general, but the Turks also get to move 1 unit free, making a legal move. It has to stay in original Turkish area, and you can't move more than 2 Turkish pieces total. So because Turkey adds a 3rd movement, that would change the situation. Oh, on the setup, as pointed out, some of the pieces are already spent. Now, I've only set up the units that are on the board that are active at the beginning of the game. So, like Italy's not set up yet. It's not clear whether you should set them up or not, but they would confuse me. With the exception of Turkey. Turkey isn't active at the beginning of the game, but they enter automatically, I believe, in the winter. So, yeah, not a lot of randomness in this. Okay. Heavy artillery and tanks. They follow normal movement results as armies. They can move to another area and count as one of the 2 allowable moves of their faction. You do not want to put them in areas, you may not be allowed to, put them in areas that do not have an army. You definitely don't want them in areas without one of your armies. That can happen. You don't want to put them into such a position, even if it's somehow legal. The Strasstruppen can be deployed to where there's any army. I don't believe this costs anything. I think you just get to shift it during your movement for free. I'm not positive of that. Again, the rules are not not that well hammered out. Land movement restrictions. Let's see what we got here. Anything? Okay, so some special restrictions here. The Central Allies cannot conduct movement into or through German home areas. However, they can retreat into such areas if they have no other options. And if they're in a German home area at the beginning of their movement phase, they can move through or out of such areas as long as their destination is not another German home area. Okay. There's some areas that are completely black, like Switzerland, which are just impassable. And nations that are neutral are considered impassable in general. You know, I'm going to need breaks, so I'm going to pause this here. Compiling or joining my videos is pretty easy nowadays. Sea movement. The Western Allies alone and units of the U.S. are able to use sea movement. These can move through seas to friendly controlled areas. Again, I think there was a more extensive naval set of rules when I was playing it, and that was limited to really just dealing with the blockade. Because there was capability for the Germans to kind of sneak their fleet out and stuff. So, I don't know. That's my memory. Okay, so the origin and destinations are limited to places that have anchors on them. There's going to be also an amphibious invasion, so don't worry about the fact that you can't land in enemy territory. And they list them. One of the two Western Allies moves permitted during this phase. Only one of them can be a sea move. The United States can make one strategic move per turn, and this can be a sea move, and the other Eastern Allies can still make their normal 2 strategic moves. I'm assuming the U.S. can only make one sea move per turn. Armies are moved through sea areas. The British MEF and IEF, Mediterranean Expedition Force, and Indian Expeditionary Force, I don't know, in the Near East may not be moved out of the Near East theater unless Turkey is conquered, except as a result of defeat and naval evacuation. Heavy artillery and tanks cannot use sea movement or participate in amphibious invasions. You're not going to see U.S. tanks coming into this game, even though there actually were a few. I don't know if there were enough to count. If you move an army via sea movement to an enemy-controlled area, that's going to be an amphibious invasion. Different rules. The Black Sea, we've got the limitation on that already. Great Britain is the only one who can refit their combat units using sea supply. And if you become spent somewhere outside of the Western Allied line of supply with any nation other than the Brits, you will not be able to refit your units, which is a problem. So you probably don't want to go doing stuff with them. Naval units themselves. Okay. The U-boats, the Germans are allowed to shift the U-boats between these two during their movement. The Hague Convention has less effect on British income, but it also, or production, but it also is going to have less effect on U.S. entry. This game tries to make it claims that it's trying to limit the effects of the U-boats on U.S. entry. It's always been one of my gripes is I felt like the Wilson regime was very, very much committed to entering the war long before Lusitania and everything. And really, the U-boat issues, they were using as an excuse to increase commitment or to further pull the country with them, just like Roosevelt pulled the country into World War II, you know. Even though in both cases they were able to create a situation where where their enemy on the world stage did something that helps bring the U.S. along. I would say probably you could make the same kind of argument about the Near East in modern U.S. Planning. Okay. The blockade box is the other side. The Brits are initially blockading the Germans, and the Germans can come out and give challenge. And we jump over to the combat phase. Okay, combat is fairly simple. Let's first look at naval combat. If both sides are in the blockade box, then there's going to be a round of combat. Both players roll a die for each of their fresh fleet in the box. A 1 hits the enemy once, a 2 hits the enemy twice, a 3 hits the enemy not at all, etc. And anything above a 2 doesn't hit. Those hits will then be received. 1 hit, I'll flip a fresh fleet to a spent fleet. Once everything's spent, additional hits will eliminate spent fleets. Whoever has the most fleets left after the battle wins the battle, and the losing side has to withdraw back to their home port. If they're tied, whoever has the most fresh fleets wins. If still tied, the original controller of the blockade box stays there, and the loser pulls back. The Central Powers have a card that helps them in the naval combat with a reroll. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Ground combat's a little bit more complicated. You're going to be making attacks against an adjacent enemy-controlled area. You can make as many attacks as you like, but you have to have a fresh unit in the area you're attacking from in order to make the attack. Units are either fresh or spent. In general, units don't get destroyed unless they can't retreat. And you can attack. And let's see. We get into lots of rules here. So let's take a look at the procedural menu or cookbook type item here. Okay. When you declare an attack, first you must attack any trenches that are there, then any fresh units, then any spent units. You're going to be attacking 1 unit to 1 unit for the battles, which is not unreasonable because the entire forces in a space are not necessarily getting pulled into the battle. Okay. Trenches are going to have special rules, so we're going to be jumping away. We're going to be jumping back to how trenches work in a little bit. They're similar. The defender designates which of his friendly armies will be defending. I don't know how much difference there is. There might be units with special abilities attached to them, though. The attacker rolls a die, applies any modifiers. He may get to roll more than 1 die, in which case he gets to choose the best die. The defender rolls a die and applies any modifiers. The defender may be allowed to roll multiple dice, generally from terrain, I think. They say here counterbattery, so maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe terrain is just a +1. Wouldn't be surprised. You roll your dice and you pick the highest die to use there. You compare the 2 die rolls to one another, including modifications, and the high die roll wins the combat. Oh, I forgot to mention something. When the attacker declares he's attacking, he flips the unit that's attacking over. It is now spent. Now, yeah. If the attacker wins the combat, actually it happens down here. If the attacker wins the combat against a fresh defender, the defender takes a loss, and that army's flipped over to its spent side. If the attacker wins against a spent defender, once he's gotten rid of all the fresh defenders, the defender has to retreat all of his units using the retreat procedure, or he can attempt to cancel this with the "they shall not pass" rule, which is just basically, I don't want to retreat, in which case you might take a loss in order to prevent the retreat. If the defending units do retreat, the attacker must advance into the space. Can't leave it empty. If the defender wins the combat, nothing further happens. The attacker's been spent. That's the biggest cost that happens there. Okay. If you're attacking an unoccupied enemy area, you still have to spend a fresh unit to attack. You will automatically win unless there's a garrison there. Unless it's, well, there's always going to be a garrison, but unless it's a garrison in an originally owned territory. In which case, that originally owned area is going to have a fixed die roll. It's a 3 if there's mountain, swamp, production, or flag. Otherwise, it's a 2. And the attacker rolls, and how do you win? Okay, the attacker normally wins ties. So in this case, the attacker would have to normally roll a 2 or higher to get into an area that's empty. If he fails to do that, he's just spent, and he can make another attack to try to get in there. If it's an empty area, he's reconquering his own territory, he doesn't have to roll the die, but he does still have to spend. We get to the next thing here, right? Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'm making a mess. Okay. There's special rules due to items and stuff. Okay, let's look at some of the modifiers to the dice. The big push. If an attack is successful, the attacker will get a little marker that says they have a +1 DRM for any more attacks from that same area into the same targeted enemy area. And this bonus will be lost if you fail in an attack, or if you choose to attack from a different area at some point before you go back, before you finish that big push. Or if you happen to advance into the area. I.e., if you win the battle, you no longer need the big push modifier. You wouldn't be getting there. If you're successfully attacking against a trench, you will not get the big push modifier. But you get it once you break through the trench if you attack other things. Mountain areas. Mountains give a +1 die roll modifier to the defender. The Russian Caucasus Army, if it's doing anything... No, if any other Russian unit is defending or attacking into Kars or Caucasus Square, any other Russian unit, they'll get a -1 DRM. So they've got 1 unit that can fight over there. And then some event cards, etc., are going to have an effect. They shall not pass. Okay, you lost the battle as the defender. You're taking damage on a spent unit, and you decide you do not want to retreat. You can declare that you're going to try to prevent that, and you roll a die. You subtract 1 from the die roll for each permanently eliminated unit of that nation. And if that die roll result is 2 or higher, you have passed, and the retreat is canceled. But the combat loss still applies. The defending unit will be permanently eliminated from the game and cannot be rebuilt. This may cancel the ability of attacking units to advance even if the eliminated unit was the last unit in the area. However, the attackers can attack again. If the net die roll is 1 or less, the test is failed, and the original combat result, the retreat, is conducted as per the normal rules. Okay, if only spent defending units remain in an area and an attack is made, okay, if you have to retreat, You can split up how you like, but you can only go into friendly controlled areas, and you can't overstack. If you're in a situation where you can't retreat, then the excess units are destroyed, and they will not be able to be rebuilt. The Western Allies in the United States, if they take a retreat while in an anchor, that might include a bridgehead too, and they have no eligible area to retreat to, they may conduct a naval evacuation. The retreated unit will be eliminated, but it's not permanent. It goes back into the force pool, which right now I've got in the counter tray. When all defending units have retreated, the attacker or an attack against the garrison is successful, the unit that attacked must advance into the area. Remember, it's probably spent. The attacking player moves that unit into the area. He can bring any other units, any other friendly units from the desired area. Now, what it doesn't say here, these advancing units may include friendly units of the Alliance regardless of the current status, which faction they belong to, or whether or not they've already been active. Yeah, so you could have Eastern and Western, so you can draw U.S. troops forward with you. So that's no problem there. Okay. Now, they maintain their current status, and they can continue attacking from their newly conquered area unless they entered the mountains or Pripyat marshes on their attack. Which, I don't know how we'd mark that. Maybe just kind of invert the units or something. Phew. All right, let's pause for a bit. Amphibious invasions. A single British army can make a sea move into an enemy-controlled land area with an anchor symbol. This is considered an amphibious invasion. Really? Move with. Interesting. Yeah, that's why Gallipoli has one. Okay. I guess you can't make amphibious invasions. Certainly not against the German coast, which I understand. And there is an Austrian navy. Bulgaria might have been a possibility. I don't know. The invading army. Okay. In order to do so, there will be a special amphibious invasion marker that's placed. The invading army must attack the enemy land area using normal combat eligibility and resolution. However, it may only roll one die, even if it was given more by technology. This can be increased, the die roll can be increased by +1 if you flip a fresh fleet to a spent fleet. This is, using naval bombardment to support the attack, and you almost certainly want to do that. If the enemy units occupy the invading area, the defending player gets an extra die. If at least 2 of the defending dice are both higher than the attacker's roll, then the invader is permanently destroyed outright. If no enemy units occupy the invading area, the defending garrison has a single die roll with a roll of 4. If you manage to clear the enemy units, the assaulting army must advance into the area using normal rolls. And now you've got a port, and you can start supplying and all kind of great stuff, right? If the invading army wins but does not retreat, the defending unit does not retreat the defending unit, or is itself defeated but not destroyed, a beachhead is formed. Yeah, okay. The amphibious invasion marker will be flipped over to its beachhead side, and it's placed on the border between the sea and the invaded area. The unit does not retreat from the combat in the normal manner. Also, since a garrison defender rolled only 1 die, a losing invading unit attacking an empty area cannot be permanently eliminated, and thus the beachhead is automatically formed. When the army is located with a beachhead, it's treated as being adjacent in a special little land area that can hold, I believe, 2 units. You can move one other army via sea move to an existing beachhead, a maximum of 2 units stacked there. This does not constitute another amphibious invasion. If the units with the beachhead and the enemy units in the adjoining land area will be conducted normally, if the amphibious invasion, the special rules don't apply on that. If the beachhead is retreated, however, it will be eliminated or naval evacuated. naval evacuated. Invasion of Belgium. You're not allowed to conduct an amphibious invasion into Belgium if Germany has at least one fresh fleet or U-boat on the map. And that's because the Germans seized the ports quickly enough, and the tightness of the situation, in terms of the waters being a fairly small area, et cetera, and difficult to navigate through without getting caught, the Germans would have been able to interdict any invasion there, as long as they have some naval capacity, and that they take to the extent of even just having some U-boats available. East Africa. Okay. The von Letow unit in Vorbeck. And the British East African Expeditionary Force are the only units that are permitted on the East Africa track. They move only as a result of advancing after combat. Oh, are they there at the beginning of the game? Wow, there's a lot of stuff here I didn't see. Places where you can keep stuff, like boxes to keep markers. Which is fine because this is the setup. No, this seems to be their East Africa, the Beth. I don't know. Okay, where are we here? They move only as a result of advancing after combat. The armies in the East African theater may not move during the movement phase. In East African combat, this can be conducted normally, but no technology effects are allowed, nor can trench markers be placed here. If the Letow-Vorbeck unit conducts a normal attack, then the CP player can add +2 to the unit's attack die roll. In addition, units may retreat into any adjacent East African area. You might say, well, wait, what does that mean? Well, that's to say that you can retreat into an area that you don't control, I believe. I'm not sure why that's there, because, yeah, I do not get that, actually. I don't get the intention of that role, because you certainly can't retreat into the enemy space. And the way they're talking about it is they can traverse them as regardless of who actually owned them. Guerrilla attacks. This is a special form of combat that only the Letow-Vorbeck unit can use. It can use it even when spent. The big deal with it is you can attack without being spent, or without spending yourself. And if you're unspent, a 5 or a 6 is successful. If you're spent, only a 6 is successful. And the success, I guess, is the same as a normal success there. Here's what goes wrong. So if the Germans attack here, and the Brits Brits are spent, and they have to retreat, I think they're allowed to retreat into there. I don't know. I don't know what that's supposed to fucking say. Maybe I'll look at the example of play and see if it covers that. Unfortunately, this is one of those games where they give an extended example of play, and too often that means sloppiness in the rules. I'm generally opposed to these. You'd think they can't possibly add a negative, but there's 2 things that they do wrong. 1, they take up paper, and they add to the expense of the game. And 2, the rules end up not being in alignment with what's shown in the example of play. Now, I just read the rules and figure that's how I should learn the game, unless I see something that bothers me. But sometimes I've found, oh no, you're doing that wrong. Look at the example of play. And the rules are absolutely clear and in contradiction to the example of play. And it's like, okay, great. This is stupid. But here, there's enough of a contradiction that, well, I don't understand what the hell is going on. If either army is forced to retreat and has no space to do so, being in the last space of the track, well, that's what we've got here, right? So that seems to indicate that the Brits would not be able to retreat there. It is permanently eliminated. And the exploratory army cannot avoid elimination. Now, It looks very easy for the Germans to get control of East Africa. All right, how about trenches? I told you they were different. So trenches there are some on the board to begin with. Normally they become available in spring of 15, but there's a couple on the board before that. If a trench is present, you must attack it before you attack any units. The trench rolls its defense dice normally, gets die roll modifiers, and is considered to be the defending unit until it's breached. If the attacker is successful in combat against a trench, the trench is breached, and that'll be flipped over. It has a little, hey, I'm breached. Okay. The attacking unit is not spent and may attack again if it's successful. But the attacker doesn't get a big push modifier. Once it's breached, yeah, okay. If the attack is successful, the trench marker is temporarily defeated by being breached. The attacking armor is not spent, blah, blah, blah. If it's unsuccessful, the attacker is spent. And the defending units still hold the area after the attack is over. Any trench markers that are breached are immediately and freely reset to their normal non-breached side. So, again, like with the big push, you have to make your attack from one area into another. You could breach the trench, and then it'll get reset if you start attacking from somewhere else. Tech effects, yeah. So, heavy artillery. They're either ready or fired. Once they're used, they get flipped to the fired side, and they can't be used again until you regroup them during your turn. If you attack with heavy artillery, you use it in conjunction with an army in the area. It has to be the same nationality as the artillery. The Western Allies artillery can be used for both French and British. When the combat's initiated, the heavy artillery and the attacking unit will be flipped. It allows you an extra die on your combat roll. When A2 technology is achieved, the second level of artillery, you get to roll 3 dice if you have a ready or flown air superiority marker in that area. The air superiority will not be flipped. Now, heavy artillery might end up, it cannot voluntarily be placed in an area with no armies present, but it might end up in such. They don't need to be attacked, and if the area is conquered and the artillery is alone, then it will not get to retreat. But if the area is conquered with normal defense roll, it would get its retreat along with the other units. But if you're fighting a garrison, if the garrison is defeated, and that can automatically be the case, the heavy artillery will be eliminated permanently. Okay, the C1 technology is a counterbattery fire. And with this, if the attack is containing heavy artillery, if an area containing heavy artillery is attacked and the artillery is in ready status, and it has a unit which matches the nationality of the artillery being used, then you can do counterbattery defense. You flip it to its fired side, and the defending unit gets 2 dice on its defensive roll. The actual defending unit does not have to be the same nationality as the artillery. There just has to be a correct nationality unit in the space for the defense. Is that true for the attack? No. For the attack, you have to use the right nationality. Okay. Tanks. Okay, only the Western Allies have tanks. This is a combat unit with special capabilities. The tank attacks alone, and it doesn't require an army. If it attacks, it automatically breaches a trench. If the P3 aviation technology is active when the unit attacks, it automatically breaches a second trench. Once this combat has been resolved, you flip the tank over to its spent side, and the unit has to be refit like a normal army. Tanks have no defensive value. If an opponent conquers an area that is just a garrison, then the tank is eliminated permanently, just like the artillery. The Strasstruppen. This allows the German to make up to 2 re-rolls when attacking with units located in the same area as the Strasstruppen. Apparently there are dots on it that you can track how many hits, how many times you get to use it. Once you've done the attacks, the marker comes off the map and it gets to be redeployed. The aviation markers, these give you capacity for recon, which will give you a defensive advantage over the opponent and prevent an opponent from using aviation for the same purpose in a counter-air policy. If an area with air superiority is attacked, the defender wins the first combat that results in a tie. Remember, the attacker normally wins ties, and then flips the marker to its flown side. If an area containing air superiority is captured and all friendly units are forced to retreat, all air superiority markers are removed from the map. They'll get to come back, though. Now, what I don't see here is that likewise attempt to prevent an opponent from using their aviation resources for the same purpose. That I do not see. That doesn't seem to be spelled out in this rule. Maybe it's somewhere else. Maybe it's in the playthrough. Who knows? Commerce rating and fire control. These cards increase U-boat chances of reducing Great Britain's production, which really shouldn't be said here. Same with Q-ships and anti-submarine. They affect that. Poison gas. Poison gas is a +1 DRM when used in the first attack from any area. Okay. Time to pause, and it looks like my battery situation is not working well, so we'll get to the production. Now, it looks like there's a lot of rulebook left, but like I said, there's a complete playthrough in here as well, and scenario information for what that's worth. And I think some design notes and such now. And the fucking battery didn't fully charge. Got somewhere though. Okay. And I got another one, and that one's like flashing for some reason. I don't know what the fuck. It was doing it. I turned the camera to it. It stopped, and it's doing it again. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird because it's something internal to the charger as opposed to power is getting to the charger no matter what. It's just not getting to the battery. And it's acting as if the battery's full. Anyway, for production, you get a number of production points, which is listed on here. And you collect the points, but maybe there's a way of tracking it here. Yeah, I don't see it. Basically, you've got your production spaces all over the fucking place. So you have to kind of count them, or at least count what's been taken away from you. There's no track to keep them, keep track of them on. And I may change that, use a cube somewhere or something just to keep those points in play. I could use the US chart for it. That would be very helpful, but not necessary. You can always count it. There aren't that many. We're talking like 9, I think, is the biggest set to begin with. Now 12 for the Germans. US, I'm sure, doesn't have very many. US has 9 and 13 eventually. I was going to say, I'm sure they don't have very many because they don't have much to support, but they do have points to spend. Okay, so if the enemy owns it, you lose the points. The enemy can't use them. But it's kind of funny how in the Napoleonic games, that production translates over almost 100%, whereas in something like this, in a 20th century game, it doesn't seem to. And yes, I understand there are differences, but as long as the industry is not destroyed completely, there's some capacity to pull it back together. The World War II, the Third Reich and everything, tends to increase the production. So it's like really weird. Like World War I production, you don't tend to capture production, but every other era that's covered, some production translates over. You get partial points, for conquests and World War II games and everything, just not in World War I. And that's not correct. The Germans did use some of the Russian territory and performed, used that for some production. And certainly grain and stuff was gotten, which is important. Now, La Grande Guerre handles that aspect of it. It just doesn't handle physical plant and coal mines and stuff like that as being capturable. Okay. If the German fleet has control of the blockade box, Britain loses 1 point due to commerce rating, and Germany gains it because they've freed up the blockade. Some of the cards can play around with this. U-boat warfare. So there's the 2 boxes, and what you do is based on which one you're on, you do what? They don't decide to give you rules on here. You roll 2 dice for each fresh U-boat in the game. Yeah, that's really bloody helpful. Okay. Successes if unrestricted warfare. Okay, and also if certain technologies are in play. At the beginning of the game, I'm doing restricted. I don't have to, but I don't want to bring the U.S. in right away. Although maybe cutting back on the British production right away would be valuable. Now, during Germany's production phase, the Central Powers has to roll for each and see whether or not they lose the U-boats, i.e. they become spent. You don't ever permanently lose them. Any production that has been sent to you, Lend-Lease type stuff, comes to you at the beginning of your production phase. Now this is weird because it means for Britain to send to France, the money is in transit and it doesn't get there for an entire cycle of turn, in the turn order. However, for the Western Allies to send to Russia, it gets there, or for the U.S. to send to the Western Allies, it gets there on the next of that player's turn. So like if you're sending to Russia, the Russian turn, which would immediately follow. Okay, is that a big deal? No, not particularly, but it does take a little longer to get there. I don't know, what you would want to do with that. Moreover, I don't think there's any penalty for sending money to Russia. Like, it doesn't get reduced or anything. It's fully capable. And that's a long trip, that had issues and wasn't fully received. Maybe it's baked into the Russian production, which would, seamlessly handles the problem, right? Except, again, more is being swept under the rug that you as the player don't see, so if you disagree with some of the decisions, you have less mechanisms to toy with. But this is not a game to toy with. That's my feeling. You got the cards. As soon as you start adding cards, it becomes harder, but and the system's fairly simple. If you want more complexity, don't add to this. Take a different game. Anyway, you announce how you spend your points overall. You can refit units, raise new units, construct trenches, transfer production to friendly nations. It's done in a strict order, which is listed for each of the alliances. Okay, refitting units. It costs 1 PP to refit a spent army, U-boat, fleet, or tank, and it goes to fresh. And notice, not artillery. That stuff charges for free. After spending the point, you flip the unit over. However, you can only use the PP from that nation, and I believe you have to be in supply, but they put some italics in there. Spent fleets have to either be in home port or in the blockade box. Well, I don't know where else they can be. Okay. In order to be refit, the army or tank must be land supplied to a home production area. There's one special case, though. Britain and the United States obviously can't land supply, so they can supply to France's home production areas to be refit. Britain can also use sea supply to refit British units that are not land supplied. Now here they say Near East and East Africa, but I seem to remember there was something against sea supply to the East Africa. I don't remember. Raising new unit. I guess I could look it up. Oh, no naval evacuation. That's what I'm thinking. Okay. That's fair. Constructing trenches. Starting in the spring of 1915, you can buy trenches. And everyone except Germany can construct one for 2 PPs. Germany can construct one at a cost of 1 PP. I think that's the cost of one, not the limitation of how many you can build, because it doesn't say per turn. It's just, again, that iffy wording, and there's a lot of it throughout that just wasn't carefully combed through. Trenches may be placed into any area that contains at least one land-supplied army of the constructing nation. 2 nations cannot share the cost to build a trench, even if they're the same nation for the trench. Existing trench markers may be augmented with additional ones, so long as there's at least one land-supplied army of the improving nation. A trench marker is already in place prior to the turn, and the area is not a square, circle, or mountain. If eligible, you add the other trench marker, but you can only have 2. You can't buy them both at the same turn, which was already stated in other words, but that's okay. Exception: Germany can deploy 2 newly built trench markers in the same area if it wishes. The Germans are good at digging. Limitations: it's a fixed number. Nothing exciting to say there. You got the pieces limits. Limitations: square or mountain areas only allow 1. Circles do not allow any. Standard are allowed 2. Okay. As long, if you have no units, the trench can stay in the map and it cannot be removed, except by being conquered. This is a weird rule that I don't quite understand. Basically, the trench infrastructure, if you leave it behind after advancing, you don't have those trenches to put further forward. However, they can be destroyed if they're attacked somewhere. And I don't really have a grasp on what's going on. There's some infrastructure support for it all, but I don't know how much depth you need. Following and that's it for trenches. That one rule weirds me out. I guess I don't know what it's meant to do. I really don't understand it. I prefer the games that don't have individual trench markers and units are in a state of entrenchment at any given time. But following the expenditure of production points for any other purposes, you can throw some to transfer. You put them in the home area of the next country, and they're just available. Now, there's limitations to how many you can spend, which I don't see yet. The transfer has to be done over a supply route of friendly controlled land areas. Oh, I see why you can't do it to the Russians. Okay. Or not easily. From a home production area to a home area of the receiving nation, the supply route can be traced through one neutral nation. And if you do so, it costs you an additional production point on top of everything else. which means I think you could send money through Turkey on the first turn of the game. I don't know. Okay. However, I have something here. Great Britain wishes to transfer to Serbia through a neutral Greece. Well, I'm not going to get a land route to Greece either. So there has to be more than that. Let's see what we've got here. It can be traced from a home production to a home area at the time of the transfer. And the Western Allies and the United States can transfer overseas. Okay. So here's, yeah, so the only way to get money to Russia, and this is not true, would be through Romania. Because you're not going to be able to sea supply up there. I assume there's no port to get there. Yeah, through Romania or through the Black Sea, or if you can cut through Austria or something. So yeah, Russia is going to be pretty much on their own. Turkey. You might be able to hook Turkey up, and that gives you a good reason to do that, to conduct the Turkish campaign, which there's not very much reason for. Okay. Good enough. In addition, the United States can't transfer until at least one of its armies has been moved to another area, i.e. they can't send money before they're actually sending troops, which of course isn't the case. So the money they were lending, the materials they were selling and everything, that must all be handled abstractly in the normal production. Each Western Allies nation can only transfer, which again makes it so you can't tinker with the game. You can't, say, well, what if the U.S. was truly neutral? Each Western Allied nation may only transfer PP to any of the Eastern Allies or other Western Ally nations who have a base production number less than its own. And Russia can only transfer to Eastern Allies. Germany can make transfers to any other Central Power nation. The others may not transfer to anyone. And the limit is you can never transport more than 4 PPs to any single nation on one turn, and a nation can never receive more PPs than its total production, with the exception that most of the neutral miners have zero production. They're allowed to receive 1. This is the only way they can get production. And that prevents them from, getting such an influx of materials that they wouldn't have the infrastructure to support that change. You can give them some guns, for their to raise up an army or to revitalize an army. You can give them ammo and stuff like that. But basically, you can't give them enough to completely support rebuilding their army or something. That's basically 2 points. So I don't know. It's close. Where are we? Technological advances. Okay. Technology is very simple in this game, but I have to swap batteries because, this didn't charge completely and it's wearing out faster than I expect. Just missed my flight of turkeys just as I was swapping the battery. Boom, the whole squadron came down there. It took about a minute and a half. I could have probably caught a few of them, but it's always impressive to see them sailing down. I don't know. I like my turkeys. They make me happy. Not as happy as the deer, probably, but there's something about the turkeys that's a little weird. And when they're not as upset about people coming out and throwing things at them. I don't know. I never did that to the deer. Okay. Technology. Western Allies and Germany can research new technologies. They draw a card each turn from their tech deck. Is that right? I guess. I don't know. Let's see the sequence of play. Yeah. All right. Some cards will give you a bonus technology draw. And you can keep 1 eligible card. Now, eligible isn't like based on, as far as I can tell, the event card. So like Falk or Scourge might give you anything, I guess. I don't know. That seems kind of weird to me, but whatever. If 2 eligible cards are drawn, you can select one to make active. The other is returned to the deck. The active player shuffles and draws 2 cards. Yeah, he can keep one that's eligible. Normal research. You shuffle the tech deck and draw 1 card. If it's eligible, you get to keep it. Otherwise, it goes back in the deck with no effect. Now, a card is eligible if you've got all the proper technology in sequence before it. So like you can't get the A2 card before the A1 card and stuff like that. Some of the cards put a counter on the map. This has to be with a land-supplied unit. The G1 technology doesn't place a counter on the map, but you can only play it under those same limitations. It's done during an attack, so it's pretty obvious. If the eligible army is in the same area with friendly armies that may not normally be eligible to use the ability, they may gain the benefit as long as the eligible unit remains in the area. In essence, they share the technology. This is the only way that the U.S. can receive shared technology. No. The U.S. can only receive a shared technology benefit in this manner from a French army in its area, so they can't get it off the Brits. Okay. The poison gas cards may have to be returned to the deck. If you just drew it in the previous research technology step, you get to keep it. You don't have to immediately throw it out. Otherwise, you have to throw it out. Basically, these are one-time use cards, and they're use it or lose it. And I think they go back in the deck no matter what, to reflect all the different technologies of gas that were available. The regroup phase, the faction does some cleanup. Okay. Aviation technology, the P series of card, grants the use of air superiority markers. Each card you get gives you 1 P. And here's where we're going to see how you can knock things out. Each turn, the phasing player must determine how many of his available air superiority markers can be placed on the map. The opponent's P technology and a dogfight resolution roll will determine exactly how many of their markers may be placed. Both players roll a die for each level of P technology they have in play. The highest value thrown by the phasing player is the air superiority value. The highest value thrown by the opposing faction is its air interception value. If the air superiority is higher than the air interception, the phasing player may use air superiority markers equal to the difference between their values. If the difference is 0 or less, no air superiority markers can be used. Then you rearrange them into qualifying areas, and when they're in combat, you allow the defenders to win the first tide attack. There is no sense in which where you place them on the board has any effect, which is exactly the opposite of what is implied by the air combat, the air effects, the rule on the air effects earlier. Triple Entente air superiority can only go in land-supplied Russian, or French or British armies. Central powers can only be placed in German land-supplied armies. When the Red Baron is active, the Germans get an extra die during dogfight. Either the Western Allies, during any dogfight sequence, either the Western Allies or Germany, if the Western Allies rolls doubles, I don't know what that means, if they have 3 dice or something, I guess any doubles works, and the value exceeds Germany's current P technology level. Which value? The value on each die or the value of the sum? I'm assuming on each die, but I don't know. The Red Baron is shot down and he's removed from play. And here we have an example. Allies have P3. I shouldn't have to read the example. The rules should be clear enough. This should be simple. I know it's not trivial to write things clearly, but this one I can see it should be simple. The ally, it's like there's no attempt to try to nail the rules down. And I'm not talking about extra words. I'm talking about it should have been easy to write it properly and tightly. The Allies have P3 technology. Germany has P2 in the Red Baron marker. The Allies roll 3-3-4. Okay, that's doubles. Germany rolls 2-3-6. Germany's high roll of 6 versus 4 allows the Germans to deploy both their air superiority markers. The Allies rolled a double 3s, and 3 is greater than P2, so the Red Baron is shot down. Okay, all heavy artillery gets marked back. Conquest and liberation. Smaller nations have one area, and they're conquered if that area is gone. Larger nations may have multiple areas. They're conquered when their flag is controlled at the end of any victory point phase. There are some special cases. Russia collapses under unique conditions. I don't know if it's their flag or any flag. France is conquered when Paris is controlled if they fail to get control at the end of their next combat phase. Basically, the French get a chance to get theirs back. Germany is conquered when Berlin is controlled and you fail to retake it. Both cases, Germany or France, that ends the game immediately in a victory for the opposite side. And this didn't have much time to charge. Okay, conquered nations, all their units will be removed from the game except for one. If the units are removed from an enemy-controlled areas, resulting in no opposing units being present, ownership of the area reverts to the original owner, i.e. they were the garrison as well. The conquered nation no longer generates production points and does not participate in the war for the rest of the game, even if it's liberated. However, liberation prevents it from being worth victory points. All armies of a conquered nation are removed from the game except for a maximum of one army that finds itself in a friendly controlled area. Well, how can you be in any other kind of area? When the nation is conquered, even after a retreat. Yeah, I don't see any other way. If there's multiple armies that qualify, the owning player can choose any eligible one. The army is made spent, and it can continue to function as an army of the alliance to which it belonged, but it can never be refitted and made fresh. You know, the Belgians joined in some assaults after they were conquered. I'm not so sure with the Romanians, probably. Too abstract, it's abstraction beyond the level of the game. Or detail behind the level of abstraction. The army is spent, if not already, and may continue to function. It remains spent for the remainder of the game until eliminated. At the beginning of any production step, here's how maybe it happens, of the faction phase to which the conquered army belongs, the owning player may absorb the conquered army by voluntarily, permanently eliminating it and turning it into and refitting a spent allied army in the same area. And it gets you a free refit, which is quite possibly useful because spent armies aren't terribly helpful for much of anything. Maybe a little bit in defense, especially if you can build trenches to support them, then the trench has to be knocked out first. If at any point in the game the CP player controls both Moscow and Petrograd, well, that never happened, areas, or the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk is signed, Russia collapses and surrenders. When it collapses, all Russian units are removed from the map and permanently eliminated. All, not leaving one. Any Triple Entente armies in Russian home areas are placed back anywhere in their own home area if they can trace a path through Russian or friendly controlled areas. If they can't, they're eliminated. I'm not sure if they can go back by sea, but any Entente armies in Russia that have a land-only trace are going to have a pretty impressive amount of territory conquered. Probably didn't need that role. Russia no longer generates production points, and the CP will get 4 victory points at the end of the game. Okay. Neutrals. Turkey, you can't move, attack, produce production points, be attacked, or entered at any time. You have no option to do any diplomacy of any type in this game, including invasions. The nation of Turkey automatically joins the CP at the start of the Allies phase of winter 1914. Oh, I'm sorry. Which allies? Central Allies. Central Allies is the Central Powers Allies. They get to operate that turn. You start talking about allies and I get confused. Although technically there aren't any. Turkey is a neutral nation for the first game turn only. When the Turks are deployed, Great Britain deploys the MEF in Sinai and the IEF in Basra. And Russia deploys the Caucasus Army in cars. And those will all be spent. No, the IEF is fresh. Bulgaria, Italy, Romania, and Greece declare war when event cards are drawn. When a neutral nation declares war, its units show up on the map, and it participates normally. I like this. Because I like a lot of variability, this game is usually, most of this game very much doesn't have a lot of randomness and variability, but one thing that I really dislike is the sort of fixed entry of Italy that happens, or near fixed entry of Italy that happens in most games, and the minors, etc. This might end up pretty close to that because of the way the cards work, but it's also possible that they will simply not enter. Some of them allow you to kind of control the entry too much. High balance of powers. I feel like it allows too much. There are 3 nations with special rules. Albania. Neither side can enter Albania during their movement phase. However, they can attack Albania. Units may, however, retreat into the area as if it's friendly controlled, but only if there's no other option. It's never controlled by either side unless there's forces sitting in it, and it can never be used to trace supply through, which means you probably don't want to capture it. It looks like a painful job. The United States, certain event cards and other actions cost the U.S. entry marker to move forward. It starts at 0 and moves up the track. Once it reaches 8, the U.S. enters the war. During the first production phase, after the U.S. declares war, the 3 U.S. armies are placed in the United States spent. The fleet is placed in with Great Britain's fleets wherever they are and operates just like them. The U.S. may automatically flip one of their armies from spent to fresh. They can't do any movement or PP transfer during these mobilization turns. Once all 3 U.S. armies are fresh, 1 U.S. unit can sea move, and at this point, and only at this point, can you start sending resources over, which is bullshit. U.S. may not be moved to any Near East, East Africa, or to Greece or Gallipoli. The U.S. may make 1 strategic move, which may be a sea move per turn, and the other eastern nations may still make their normal 2 moves. U.S. units perform all of their operations during the Eastern Allies USA turn, not the Western Allies turn. When the U.S. armies become available for combat, they may use Western Allied heavy artillery and the tank if they're not already spent from the Western Allies. They also get the defensive benefit for air superiority markers if they haven't already flown. If the U.S. fleet becomes spent, it may not refit until 1918, and if it's destroyed, it cannot be rebuilt. Fleets can be rebuilt. Greece. Okay, Greece has more rules than most. More than the U.S. does. All this. Okay. From the start of the game until Salonika event is drawn, Greece follows normal neutral nation rules. If Salonika is drawn, that marker is placed in Greece on the Salonika open side. While Salonika is open, the Western Allies can move armies to Greece, but a maximum of 1 Western Allied army is allowed in Greece at any one time. If an army is moved on the same turn that the card is drawn, the Western Allies' trench marker is placed at no cost in Greece if 1 is available in the force pool. Greece is considered a Triple Entente ally for PP transfers to Serbia and for retreat purposes, i.e. you can supply through it for points. The Central Powers may only attack Greece if it contains a Western Allies army. If the CP attacks and would force that army to retreat, the retreat's canceled and Greece is provoked into joining the Triple Entente. The fresh Greek army is immediately placed into Greece. The spent Western Allied army remains without retreating, and the trench marker is removed if present. Remember, it'll have been... to cause a retreat, if it was there, it has to be flipped over. It wouldn't normally be removed, but basically the Central Powers has gained enough ground to get that counter off the map. That's the argument for it. I think there should be something similar to that because these areas are so big, but no, this isn't that complex a game, except for in terms of Greece.
Is the designer Greek? The retreating army is instead and placed back into. Okay, wait. We missed something here. Okay. The fresh Greek army is immediately placed. The Salonika marker may be removed as Greece has now joined the TE and there's no longer a limit on the number of friendly units that may be in Greece. The Central Power player can continue to attack. If the WA army is forced to retreat into Greece and it already contains a different WA army, the retreating army is instead removed from the map and placed back into the force pool. That's, I assume, got nothing to do with any of this and only has to do of what we've been reading and only has to do with if that would cause an overstacking in Greece, which it wouldn't if most of what this was talking about is there, or if the Central Powers attacks Greece. So I don't know, just great formatting there. Let's add that to that paragraph, even though it probably isn't supposed to apply there. At the end of any Western Allies turn that does not have an army in Greece or Bulgaria, and Serbia is controlled by the Central Powers, the Salonika marker is flipped to Salonika closed. Once it's closed, the Western Allies permanently lose the ability to move an army into Greece, and Greece returns to standard neutral nation status for the remainder of the game. And the exile of the Greek king event card is ignored if drawn. If the Salonika event was never drawn, place the Salonika marker in Greece on the Salonika closed side. I guess this is under exile of the Greek king event. Again, sometimes the formatting is not clear. This looks like it's a separate paragraph from this because look, all this is under Salonika. This stuff is shoved over. But elsewhere, I don't know. I just don't know. Okay. If the Salonika marker is placed and open, Greece joins the Triple Entente, and the Greek army is shown in fresh status. You remove the Salonika marker. From this point on, the Washington player. The Western Allied player may move any number of armies into Greece. Central Powers can attack it normally. How do you win? Okay. Other than Paris or Berlin, which we've already discussed, they get one turn to get them back. Oh, fuck. Okay. There's special requirements here. So if Paris falls and then Berlin falls, the Central Powers can still win off of Paris falling. Okay. You can't negate the enemy's victory except by taking back the space. So you could actually open Berlin up and let them through. Okay. Otherwise, you play the game out until fall of 1918, and it just ends then. Nope, we're not worried about countries collapsing, national will, anything like that. Each side gets one victory point for each enemy home area or enemy square production area controlled by the alliance. Neutral nations that join the opposing alliance during war qualify as enemy home areas. You can only get 4 victory points, though, for the CP in all of Russia, which is, I think, the number of production areas it has. Which seems kind of weird because if we look here, oh, Russia's production is 4. Okay, I thought it was higher than that. Sweet. All right, if the United States never declares war in the game and does not join the Triple Alliance, Triple Entente, the CP gets 1 whole victory point. If they're not entering, that probably is a good thing for the CP overall. But if the East Africa tract contains only 1 army, whichever side owns that army gets a VP. If both are there, nobody gets anything. The Central Powers earn a maximum of 1 if any of the following are met. If Greece joined the Triple Entente and the Central Powers managed to take Greece, is that 1 in addition to the point for the area? I don't know. You know, I guess. Salonika is closed. Okay. That is more fair. Greece remained neutral for the entire game, and the Salonika exile, the king event, was drawn. Both players total their victory points. If the Central Powers scored at least 7 higher than the Triple Entente, the Central Powers win. Any other result, the Triple Entente wins. When you're not dealing with national will and such, there's no way to express the way Germany actually failed with holdings in France, Russia defeated, and, nothing looked bad. How reasonable is that? Well, to me, it's missing, the primary reason that the war ended. And that's kind of disturbing. But again, there you have it. I mean, SPI's World War I has, I think, a very similar flaw. If you're not going to take political matters into consideration and all kinds of complexity there, you're going to miss out on, the main point, the main way that the war was actually conducted and won, which is this. That is what ended it, along with grinding down and attrition, none of which have any effect on national will or anything. So, yeah. But if you want, a light treatment of the military, a la the SPI World War I, this might be it. It's going into a little bit more detail. Let's play it out and see how well it works for us. I don't